Alright, welcome back to the SuperCoach Nuff channel. In this video we're going to go through a bit of a beginner's guide around NRL SuperCoach. So I guess the game's getting more and more popular every year, which means we've got some new players to the game. So I thought I'd put together a bit of a video just to break down, I guess, some of the basics, maybe a couple of more advanced little tactics and strategies. But I guess more than enough to get you started with your journey in NRL SuperCoach. So I guess at the very basic level, how the game works is you've got a budget of 11.8 million. So they line the budget up basically with the actual NRL salary cap to add a tiny bit of realism to the game. You now have to pick 26 players. So in the past it's been 25, but they have added an additional position this year, which we'll go into more detail on through the video. Across the season you get 46 trades, so that's where you can bring players in and out of your squad. You have unlimited trades right up until the end of round one, when obviously teams are playing their first lot of games. There's a bit of a break as well in between the two Vegas games and the rest of the round one games. So it gives you a bit of an opportunity to have a look and plan out your squad. And then after the end of round one, you are somewhat limited with trades. And players' prices change based on their 3-week average. So in games like NRL Fantasy, the prices change every week. So probably need to be a little bit more on top of, players in and out of teams and that sort of thing. But with SuperCoach, you do get that opportunity to have a bit of a look at a player before you commit to bringing them in and still get that cheaper price. So in terms of the positions, so for your starting team, you have hooker. So one on the field, one on the bench is what the numbers represent. Front row forwards, you have 2 on field, 2 on the bench. Second row forwards, 3 and 3. Halfbacks, 1 and 1. 5/8, 1 and 1. Centre wing is the only one that differs slightly. You get 4 on field, obviously matching the 4 that are on the field in our NRL team, but only 3 on the bench, and 1 fullback, 1 on the bench. So these abbreviations you'll see a lot in the game, and I forgot to put the flex one in there for this year. This is taken from last year. But I guess another sort of acronym you'll see in terms of the positioning is DPP, which stands for dual position player. So some players are eligible in 2 positions. So you can see, for example, here I've got Jaden Campbell, who's available at 5/8 and fullback this year. In saying that, Jaden Campbell's a really good example as well of a DPP player, as he is slated potentially to play halfback this year alongside AJ Brimson in the halves. So if that's the case, he won't get halfback status because he's already got 2 positions. So I think Sandon Smith's another one, hooker, halfback, but is probably going to play 5/8 this year. So you can only have 2 positions. If you have 1 position, you can get a second position through the year. And that's sort of worked out based off starting teams. And there's usually about 3 times a year that they update that. It's usually done sort of in quarters, so about round 7, round 13, 19, something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but they'll definitely announce it in advance when those are going to happen. So when you're setting up a team with those positions, factors to consider, probably the number one factor to consider is value. So at the end of the day, it's a game where you want to try to get as many points as you can with the budget that you have. So obviously value plays a big part in that. And, there'll be debates in amongst the community. Some players will say, well, points on the board are potentially more valuable than, a bit of extra cash. Whereas others will say that bit of extra cash that you make through players, outscoring their value will help you get a stronger team towards the end, which is definitely more the the one I subscribe to. So, when I'm evaluating two different players, the first thing I'll look at is, well, which one will offer more value. After that, and again, this is probably where you can sort of say these are on a similar level, so it just depends how you like to play. Job security is probably the first thing to consider. A higher ceiling, or what we call upside, so the ability to get a massive score in any given week, and then also a high floor. So that's they might not necessarily be able to get a massive score on any given week, but every week they will get a very solid score. So I think with the flex this year, it probably actually pushes the high ceiling or upside up a bit, because with the flex you'll have 18 players on field, um, but you'll only get the top 17 scores. So basically your lowest score will roll out, which gives you that opportunity to pick an upside player who may potentially flop, but in that case their score won't actually count. So I think the high upside is definitely worth chasing, even more so this year. And obviously that is tied in with job security. You want players that are going to be playing every week. You don't want someone who could potentially be in and out of the team, because they're no good to you if they're not playing in any given week. And then after that, if you're sort of tossing up between two players that offer similar value, similar upside, similar job security, then we start to go to some of these tiebreakers. So injury history is obviously one. Players that are likely to get injured again, they're no use to you if they're not playing and not scoring. Team schedule, so looking at the draw. Some people probably put a bit too much emphasis on this, um, and but I like to use it just purely as a bit of a tiebreaker. And then after that, looking for a pod or a point of difference. So lots of acronyms in SuperCoach. But if everything's even, generally the rule of thumb is you go for the player that's less owned to create that point of difference, so that hopefully they do outscore the other option that everyone has, and you get an advantage that way. So those are the things that we're considering. But as I said, these sort of things down the bottom are probably not as important as overall the value of the player in terms of points per dollar. So with that, obviously, value, there's a couple of different ways we can achieve that. But one popular strategy, and one that I guess was very much the meta back in the day, was this idea of guns and rookies. So I guess when I started playing Supercoach, I think we only had about 30 trades for the year. So it was more important to make sure you had as many of the keepers, the players you don't want to trade out, as you can, because of the limited amount of trades. Now with 46 trades, which averages about 1.5 per round, you really can be a bit more aggressive. But guns and rookies essentially works by picking the guns as well as the cheapies. So the real bottom dollar type players are ideal. Um, and what you're doing is you're maximising the amount of proven scorers in your team, as well as those cheapies that in theory will make more cash because they start at a much lower price. So I guess in this example, James Tedesco, the most expensive gun in the game at 920k, and then Rob Toya, another rooster, pretty popular. As you can see, he's been selected in my team by the different colour on the snip from the website. But at 198, that's bottom dollar price this year, just under 200k. So, if these guys are starting and playing in the team, then obviously they do have the most potential for value, given that they've got the most room to make money. In saying that, using this strategy is dependent on available cheapies. So, if there's not a lot of bottom dollar cheapies starting, and we've got to go a few more, sort of premium price cheapies, I guess you could call them. So I think we're talking around the 300 to 400k range, for example. Then obviously you've got to make some sacrifices with the amount of guns that you can carry. So I guess some common mistakes when you're selecting your team that we see with a lot of newer players. The first one is picking non-playing cheapies, or what's called enough. So basically, I named my channel after that concept. But essentially, given the way that SuperCoach is nowadays, with things like having 17 teams, um, which means that one team at least has a bye every week. Also, the additional trades that we have, probably the strategy of starting with a nuff that you could use for a loophole, which we'll talk about in a minute, is probably not so viable anymore. So I've just picked out Jordan Sam Rani as an example. He was at the Bulldogs, so he's gone to the Eels this year. So I hope he gets a game as a former Bulldog. But yeah, if he's not starting the season, there's no point picking a player like that. Picking those players that don't really offer value or upside. So a player like Patrick Carrigan, I've picked on him in the past, and I'll pick on him again. Just given he has that very high floor that we talked about. He'll score you 50, 60 points every week, but it's rare that he'll score you even 70, 80, and obviously upwards of there. So he's priced at what he'll give you. So you're getting a fair price for him, but you're not necessarily going to get value or upside out of that pick. I guess the other ones as well is low job security or a poor role in the team. So I guess in terms of job security, I pick someone like a Jesse McLean who, might get a start there at Penrith, but, he's probably, it's more dependent on other players being injured that he'll get a run, you'd imagine. So, you could sort of argue he's also an example of a non-playing cheapie that quite a few people have in their team currently. But just sort of not knowing his role in the team is probably a reason to fade him at this point. In saying that, at the time of this recording, it's early February. I think first week of trials is this weekend, so we will get to start to see some players, um, and is definitely a lot of cheapies that are just placeholders. But once we get stuck into team lists come out, you want to avoid those low job security type picks. I guess Jai Gray would have been a better one to have in here with Latrell on suspension for round one. Jai Gray would come in, look like a nice option playing fullback, but he's only going to literally last 1 week, and basically is relying on injury to Latrell to get a run in the team. And in terms of poor job role, a player like Jaden Salmon is a prime example of this. So he comes off the bench, he's a bit of a Mr. Fix-It. Generally will play on the edge in the second row, but can go out to the centres if needed. Could potentially fill in in the halves if there's an injury there. So with that sort of role, it's usually not viable to big scoring. If you've got edge players or halves or even centres, you want the guys playing 80 minutes. So avoiding those sorts of roles. Bench hookers are another one that are usually not ideal for SuperCoach. They generally only get about 30 minutes of game time. And, if they're only making tackles, they're just distributing from dummy half. There's not really a lot of value or upside there. So I've probably done this out of order, but selecting your team. So once you've considered picking your squad, got all those pieces in place, you do pick 13 on the field every week. You do pick 4 reserves from those guys on your bench, as well as a flex player. So the flex player can be any position. Again, I think I've done these slides out of order because I definitely had some information about the flex. As I said, the best 17 scores from those 18 will count, so your worst score will drop out. This is new this year, so not quite sure on the best strategy around this yet. You might, again, with your reserves, you might want to target those upside type picks as much as you can rather than the sort of floor type options. Or at worst, maybe pick one upside option, and if that flops, you might have a couple of other reserves there to save you. In the big buy rounds, so rounds 12, 15, and 18, So that's when there's 7 teams on bye each week. It coincides with Origin, so the week before each Origin game. It'll only be the best 13 in your team count. So you'll still pick 13, 4 reserves, 1 flex, so you can have 18 in your starting team in those weeks, but only the best 13 will count. So generally, I guess what a lot of players will do is not actually try to make sure they have 18 available. They'll try to have 14 or 15, um, and that way you're not sort of investing too heavily in any one given team or groups of teams, because generally the teams that play around 12, 15, 18, a lot of them will have buys in like round 13, 16, 19. There's usually 3 teams that have a buy in that week, and you've still got to get 17 on the field for those weeks. So, you don't want to try to have 18 every week. In those big buy rounds, generally 14 to 15 is a good number. The best 13 will count, a couple of dud scores will drop out. Every week you set a captain and a vice captain, so your captain scores double in any given week, which is why you want to, pick a player that has that ability to score quite high. And you also pick a vice captain. So if for some reason your captain doesn't play, you'll get the vice captain score will double. With selecting your team, another bit of strategy that some people sort of forget is to try and pick reserves that play later in the round. And the reason for this is it just allows more flexibility if you have things like, a late out, the player, pulls up sick the day before a game, right, and you've already picked, all your reserves, you can't sort of trade anyone on field. You're sort of stuck with having a player that's not playing. Whereas with reserves, they're a lot more flexible because obviously a reserve can be from any position. So the flex is the new position for this year. The flex can basically be a player from any position, and you can put them in that flex position. So currently, the most popular opinion is it's a great opportunity to play an extra fullback. Fullbacks are generally the highest scoring players in the game based on the averages. They usually have a lot of upside because they're involved heavily in attack. And obviously, without having to do a great deal of defending, that's really where they put their energy. And so that creates a lot of opportunity for upside. In saying that, you can also use it to make your team more flexible in terms of your trades. So, if you sort of need to trade out, I don't know, a front rower, having like a front row, second rower in your flex might be useful for that. I don't think that's the viable strategy. I think the extra fullback is the way to go. That's the way I'm setting up for this year. But again, this is completely new. So, I mean, we'll see some different strategies and we'll see how it plays out through the year. So a bit of an example, yeah, so I'll stuff this up completely. So I guess a bit of an example, this was taken from, I think, one of my draft teams last year. So normally if you were setting up your team, you'd say, well, with my front rowers, Tommy Flegler and Totola are probably, starters, whereas Sam Hughes is, I don't necessarily want to play him over those two, but he is on my bench. However, with the Bulldogs playing a game earlier in the week, it makes more sense to have Sam Hughes starting and have Tom Flegler on the bench. So, in the case that, Tom Flegler's a late out, Liam Henry might have already played, so we can't sub him in. Sam Hughes and Totola have already played, so we're basically stuck with a 0 on field. Whereas, if Tom Flegler's on the bench and then he gets ruled out late, we might be able to pivot to, say, a Tom Eisenhuth, who might still yet to be playing in that round. So a bit more of an advanced strategy. We talked about picking a captain and a vice captain before, but the vice captain loophole. So this is a bit more of an advanced strategy. So how it works is you select a vice captain who plays early in the round. So ideally somewhere in the first 2 to 3 games. You then select a captain who plays after the vice captain. So it's important that the captain plays after the vice captain. And then what you do is if your vice captain scores well and you'd like to get that score doubled, what you do is you swap the captaincy onto a non-playing player. Ideally, this is a player that's on a bye because their positioning isn't locked until the end of the round, or after the start of the last game, which is when all the other teams are locked out anyway. Um, and their team, if they haven't played in the round, so this does work for players that are playing, but it's also important that they play after the vice captain. So I guess in this example here, again, I've taken this from last year, so some of the players are irrelevant. But I've got Kalen Ponga as my vice captain and Nathan Cleary as my captain. So Kalen Ponga's playing before Nathan Cleary in this example. So Kalen Ponga goes off, scores like 120. You're like, that'd be pretty good to be able to double that to 240. So what you can do in this case, because Api Coruscant was on the bye in round one, I could swap him with Harry Grant. Harry Grant hadn't played yet at the time of Kalen Ponga going off. So I'll put the captaincy on Api Coruscant. Then Harry Grant obviously moves onto the bench. I also shuffled Flegler and Hughes around, so I take Flegler's score over Hughes' score. So happy to play Flegler on field in this case. And then, Harry Grant, we get Harry Grant's score still. We get Nathan Cleary's score still. It's just not doubled, but we do get Ponga's score doubled as the captain. Because when Api Coruscant scores a 0, the captaincy goes to the vice captain. So it is a bit more of an advanced strategy. And it's something, sometimes it's not worth the hassle of trying to finagle, teams and players around. But, if it naturally falls that way that you can do it, you've got a player on bye, you've got a high upside. So I guess, your vice captain generally you want to go for a very high upside player to try and maximise the advantage. And then you also want to have a pretty sort of steady captain that has a high floor. So, they're the sort of things you're looking for to execute this vice captaincy loophole. So a bit more on trades. So as I said, we've got 46 trades throughout the year. So every week you get 2 trades that you can use. This extends the 3 trades in those big Origin rounds, big buy rounds, I should say, through Origin. So rounds 12, 15, 18. So as we said, you don't have to try and get 18 in those weeks. All right, if you've got 12 players already, you could probably use 3 trades to get to 15 and be quite comfortable. Additionally, you get 5 trade boosts for the season. So what a trade boost is it allows you to make an additional trade each round. So, in a regular week, you can make 3 trades. In those buy rounds, you can make up to 4 trades in a given week. So, I guess another little bit of strategic play with those trade boosts. I think generally what a lot of players will do is use a lot of them early to try and optimize, getting those value players in. And then, I guess after that, it does somewhat depend on your focus. If you're playing for the overall rankings, probably most people use them quite aggressively to make sure they get to that, full team as quickly as possible. Head-to-head players may hold on to them in the hopes of trying to, have a bigger advantage in those head-to-head finals at the back end of the season. So, there you go. I just talked about that. So it is dependent on your game style as to when you use the trades and boosts. With overall, as we said, it seems to be the best strategy to be quite aggressive. Trade early and often to generate that team value. Head-to-head is a bit more conservative. And I guess trying to use your trades a bit more tactically around Origin time. So I guess like in terms of an overall strategy, which is generally where I focus, just trying to see how well I can go overall. I want to try to break up the season into 4 parts. The first part is from about rounds 1 to 6, where I'm going to be really aggressive chasing that value. Actually, I might even extend that first part out to about round 8. Just then giving yourself about 4 weeks pre-origin to start being a bit more tactical about those players that you want to, sort of bring in that will play more often during that break. So you'll probably see on this channel and a lot of other channels around that time, we start breaking out spreadsheets with tracking how many players we've got each week during that origin period. And then obviously, through the origin period, trying to navigate that, but also by that stage, you're looking to try and hit that final sort of complete team, with the hope that you have enough trades to cover injuries and stuff in the back end. One way to, I guess, try to maximize your use of trades is to avoid what we call sideways trading. So a bit of an example here, you've got two players like Ruben Garrick, Nick Meaney, very similar profile, both play, similar position, similar price, things like they both kick goals, they both play for pretty strong teams. And it might be the case of, Ruben Garrick's on the bye this week, so I'm going to trade him to Nick Meaney. This is usually considered a waste of a trade because, at some stage Nick Meaney's going to have a bye as well. So, generally these sorts of players you would just hold through the bye, take whatever points you can get from the players on your bench, and then, continue on with that same person. And you've saved yourself 2 trades. So, I guess this also comes into factoring in things like players that play Origin. So, some people will consider, 2 trades for, trading out Nathan Cleary and then back in after Origin, for example, as a, a valuable play because of the amount of points he can generate. It wouldn't be considered sideways in that instance, although some people do still consider it sideways if you are, trading out those Origin players for other, I guess, high-level players. It again just comes down to working out the value of those trades. So some other tips. I guess you want to try to avoid picking too many players from one team. And, I guess that comes down to there's going to be weeks where those teams are on a bye. And obviously it's a lot harder to cover multiple players within one team. Avoid chasing points is another massive one. And what we mean by chasing points is one week there might be a player who scores 150 points and you think, oh, that's great. There's a lot of value there now because, that 150 is baked into his 3-round average, so he's going to make money. If he did it then, he could do it again. So it's, people will bring them in based off that one performance. But the reality is that that 150 isn't going to get added to your total points. All right, like I said, you might get a bit of money out of that pick, but you're not getting the points that have already happened before they're in your team. So, don't chase points, always chase value. Another tip, and this is a bit of a shameless plug for myself, but have a follow along the SuperCoach channels on YouTube. In saying that, there is plenty of choices. SuperCoach Experience is probably one of the preferred ones that I like. The only argument is they are sort of longer form podcasts that they show. So I sometimes don't have the time to go through them, but particularly in the preseason, they'll do a lot of preview type stuff. It's definitely worth getting on. Aman Talks SuperCoach is another good one. He does a lot of analysis, statistical breakdowns, that sort of thing. Fantasy Jamie, so, as the name suggests, he probably does focus on NRL fantasy more, but definitely puts his, analysis and thought that he puts in NRL fantasy also now into SuperCoach. So I guess, they're the 3 I'll pump up. There is many others. That's not to say they're not valuable, but I guess just, to keep the list a bit short, I've picked 3 that I've found useful over the journey. And yeah, but, follow as many as you can. If, watch as many as you can. Hopefully that does include this channel. I probably don't go as deep. It's a little bit more based on vibes, but it's hopefully something that you can get around. And the last one, and this is despite everything I've just said, at the end of the day, SuperCoach is supposed to be fun. So if you want to pick the players from your team, feel free. If you're a massive Pat Carrigan fanboy, pick him. You know, I know a couple of years ago on this channel, I actually did a bit of a challenge where I set up a second team, which I know is a little bit taboo. But essentially, what I did was started with the whole Bulldogs squad, and I was trying to see, through trades, what sort of team I could get out of that season. Particularly given that was before they came good last season. So, you wanted to get out of some of those players pretty quick, smart. And it's all about having fun. So I guess that again, this is why this channel doesn't go too deep into analysis and that sort of thing. It's just an opportunity to, throw some ideas out there, see what people think, and just get together as a bit of a community and have fun. And that's ultimately what this game is about. If you can jag the 50k first prize, or you've got a head-to-head league. I won a big cash league I was in last year. That's just a bonus. But I think that's everything I've got. So rather than the black screen, I'll just go back and say if you've got any questions or just general comments and thoughts for those that are new to the game, feel free to add them below this video. Give us a like if you enjoy the NRL SuperCoach content. Subscribe for all the fantasy sports content we have on the channel.